In the shadowed halls of Buckingham Palace, murmurs began to rise, whispers too hushed for the cameras, but loud enough to reach Anne's ears. A secret plot, a child's future, and Camilla at the center of it all. It wasn't just a passing concern, it was a plan so chilling that it brought Anne to the brink. What was being done behind closed doors to alter Prince George's destiny? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The unease began not with headlines or scandals, but with the subtle rearrangement of royal routine, a shift in who stood beside George during official appearances, an unexpected absence from a ceremony Anne herself had once insisted he attend, and, most disturbingly, changes to his educational itinerary that bypassed the traditional royal path. Anne, fiercely loyal to the monarchy's heritage and fiercely protective of her family, sensed something brewing just beneath the surface. The guards were rotating in unfamiliar patterns, longtime aides around George were being quietly reassigned, and briefings about his engagements were no longer reaching the people who had always received them, including her. Anne's alarm grew not from gossip, but from tangible disarray. The prince's daily security logs, normally routine, revealed inconsistencies. A last-minute switch in transport, a cancelled etiquette session with the Duke of Norfolk's office. These weren't random disruptions, they were calculated exclusions, and Anne knew enough of the palace's rhythm to hear the discord. Her inquiries were met with dismissive nods and overly rehearsed responses. Operational changes, they said. Nothing to worry about, they repeated. But Anne was not a woman easily pacified. Then came the moment that turned concern into dread. A briefing paper, slipped into her morning folder by a loyal aide, bore markings from Camilla's private office. It outlined a structural evolution of royal roles, and though it danced around specifics, one thing was clear: Prince George's visibility and public training were to be minimized over the next year. The paper called it a modernization tactic, but to Anne, it was unmistakably a slow erasure. Her heart sank as she read it. The subtext, undeniable: Camilla was positioning herself and her lineage deeper into the monarchy's operational core, and George, the future king, was being quietly pushed aside. Determined to confront the truth, Anne arranged a discreet meeting with senior aides close to Camilla. The tone was icy. Questions were deflected. Documents were missing. Every path led to a wall of silence. The more Anne pressed, the more resistance she encountered. What disturbed her most wasn't the refusal to cooperate, but the confidence with which they stonewalled her. It was as though they already knew no one would stop them. As though this plan, no matter how unthinkable, had already been set into motion. But as Anne delved deeper, what she discovered would not only shatter her composure, it would push her to defy the very monarchy she had sworn to protect. Behind her soft-spoken facade, Camilla was orchestrating something that sent ripples through the royal bloodline. It wasn't about personal rivalry, it was about legacy, control, and reshaping the monarchy from within. And George, innocent and unaware, was her next pawn. The palace had grown quieter in recent months, but not with peace. It was the eerie silence of power shifting behind doors no longer open to all. Anne had watched it happen before with minor matters, but this was different. There was a precision to the way Camilla was operating, a slow but methodical grip over key decision-makers. Advisors who once stood firm by William's side now whispered too closely with Camilla's circle. The once distinct boundary between influence and interference had blurred, and Anne, ever the loyal sentinel, could feel the balance slipping. It began with subtle adjustments, advisors reassigned, protocols rewritten, and trusted members of George's educational council suddenly replaced. The replacements were not chosen by Anne or William, but by voices Anne couldn't trace. When she sought explanations, all roads pointed to internal alignment, a vague phrase now echoing through every corridor like a rehearsed excuse. It didn't stop there. Time-honored royal traditions, the very foundation of George's future role, were being quietly stripped from his schedule. The St. George's Day observance, once marked by generations, was now deprioritized. His early diplomatic exposure, always emphasized for heirs, was delayed indefinitely. What once appeared as oversight soon revealed itself as a campaign of removal, and at the heart of it all stood Camilla, smiling in public, decisive in private. Anne's suspicions solidified when a sealed document found its way into her possession. It was official, stamped with the Crown's own crest, but Charles's signature was oddly absent. Instead, the authorization bore the names of recently promoted advisors, those now aligned with Camilla's growing web. The document redefined George's grooming path, assigning oversight to an entirely new department controlled by Camilla's confidants. This wasn't just interference, it was redirection. It was erasure disguised as modernization. Anne's blood ran cold as she read the fine print. George's engagements were to be scaled back to preserve a contemporary image of royalty, but buried beneath the modern jargon lay the unmistakable truth: he was being quietly sidelined. And then came the most alarming discovery of all. Camilla had been hosting private consultations with obscure royal historians, figures known not for their reverence to tradition, but for advocating drastic reform. These weren't scholars seeking to uphold heritage, they were strategists pushing narratives where succession could evolve beyond the traditional line. A monarchy not tied to birthright, but to public favor and malleable structure. And Camilla was listening. She wasn't just reshaping her image, she was rewriting the script of monarchy itself. George's future wasn't simply at risk of delay, it was on the verge of deletion. Anne's instincts screamed louder than ever. This wasn't just about royal preference. It was a covert dismantling of George's path. And she was running out of time to stop it, when Anne received a conf. Identical file slipped under her office door. Her heart sank. It wasn't just speculation anymore, it was proof. Inside lay the blueprints of a future rewritten, where Prince George would no longer stand first in line, but fade quietly into ceremonial obscurity. The folder was unmarked, anonymous, and for a brief second Anne hesitated before opening it. But once she did, there was no going back. The contents were cold, calculated, and unmistakably deliberate. A strategic blueprint, meticulously crafted and disturbingly detailed, mapped out a reformation of royal structure, one that would alter the face of the monarchy for generations. At the center of this chilling document was not George, the natural heir, but a new narrative carefully curated around Camilla's grandchildren. Anne read with growing horror as she scanned the internal briefings commissioned not through the Crown's formal processes, but through a private consultancy known for its ties to corporate legacy planning. This wasn't royal tradition. It was boardroom monarchy, and the Crown was being restructured like a company with a hostile takeover in motion. The paper referred to the changes as adaptive modernization, yet every line screamed manipulation. George's official duties were to be redistributed in accordance with public resonance, an absurd euphemism that cloaked the intention to diminish his presence entirely. His foundational training in statecraft, philanthropy, and diplomatic outreach would be paused until reassessment. These weren't suggestions, they were directives, ready for execution. Anne's blood turned to ice as she flipped through page after page, each revealing a deeper web of redirection. By the final page, the real bombshell hit, an internal plan named the Heir Promotion Initiative. And under that heading, bullet-pointed and underlined, were the names of Camilla's grandchildren. Grant. Ed proposed visibility, charitable ambassadorships, and long-term public grooming, once reserved for heirs apparent. The message was as cruel as it was clear. The bloodline was being redrawn. Anne's breath hitched, and for a rare moment she felt her composure collapse. She sat alone, file in hand, with tears welling in her eyes, not just for George, but for everything she had fought to uphold. This was no longer palace politics. It was a threat to the very order of succession. The monarchy wasn't evolving, it was being hijacked. Yet as the weight of betrayal crashed over her, Anne didn't crumble. She steeled herself. If no one else would act, she would. The Queen's only daughter. The one who had stood by crown and country through scandal, loss, and global scrutiny. Anne made a silent vow that day George would not be erased. Not while she still had breath in her lungs and fire in her soul. But Anne's battle had only begun, and the walls of silence she faced would soon test even her legendary resolve. It was not a formal meeting. There were no advisors, no protocol, just two royal women in a locked room. one determined to protect her family, the other determined to reshape it. What was said between Anne and Camilla would never appear in official transcripts, but insiders say it left Anne shaken and Camilla smiling. The confrontation came after days of restless silence. Anne, driven by loyalty and a growing sense of dread, requested a private audience with the Queen Consort. No assistants, no witnesses, just truth. She entered the room holding the confidential file, the same damning document that exposed Camilla's plan to alter George's future. Anne didn't speak at first. She placed the file on the table, opened it, and waited. Camilla barely glanced at the pages. Her calm demeanor sent a chill through the air. When Anne finally broke the silence, her voice was controlled. B.T. thick with fury. "You're rewriting the line of succession in shadows," she said. Camilla didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back and replied, "I'm modernizing it." The words cut like ice. What followed was not a screaming match, but something far colder, an exchange laced with years of buried rivalry, sharp intellect, and bitter defiance. Anne accused Camilla of manipulating the crown for personal gain, of pushing her own grandchildren into the spotlight at the cost of George's rightful legacy. Camilla responded with brutal clarity. "That boy is a symbol of an era the people are starting to outgrow," she said. "You're clinging to tradition like it's sacred. But sacred doesn't mean relevant." Anne's eyes widened. She realized then that Camilla wasn't acting out of petty ambition. She believed in her mission. She truly thought she was saving the monarchy by dismantling its oldest foundations. The confrontation turned darker as Camilla began questioning whether the public would even embrace a monarchy led by William's son, in an age demanding change. She offered no apology, only a warning cloaked in civility. It's not about erasing George, it's about preparing for a monarchy that doesn't crumble under history's weight. Aides outside the room later admitted they heard raised voices. At one point, a door slammed, but it was the quiet that followed which lingered the longest. When Anne emerged, her eyes were red, her shoulders tense. She had come in armored with truth and evidence, expecting resistance, but not the ease with which Camilla brushed it all aside, not the certainty with which she defended what Anne saw as betrayal. Camilla, by contrast, exited minutes later with a soft smile and a wordless nod to her aide. It was as if she had already won the war. Anne was just beginning to fight. Yet while Anne wept in frustration, someone else had heard the argument and the ripple effect was about to hit the royal bloodline like never before. When Prince William learned the truth, the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. He had spent years preparing George for the weight of the crown. Now, he was being erased silently, strategically, and with royal approval. For the first time, William threatened to walk. Anne didn't wait for the perfect moment, there wasn't one. She handed the file to William in silence, her expression heavy with the burden of truth. He flipped through it, page by page, and with each line, his face darkened. At first, confusion, then disbelief, and then the unmistakable fire of betrayal. His son, his legacy was being carefully, almost clinically sidelined, and not by enemies of the crown, but by someone inside the gates. Camilla's fingerprints were all over it. And worse, the silence from the king's own office suggested either willful ignorance or quiet complicity. William's voice trembled not from weakness, but from restraint as he asked Anne how long she had known. She admitted she had tried to stop it herself, but now it was his turn. Hours later, William sat alone with George in the garden. The boy played freely, unaware of the tempest swirling around his name. William watched him, the image of youth, of hope. He couldn't bear to tell him the truth, not yet. But his mind was already turning, calculating, defending. The innocence of that moment hardened into resolve. This wouldn't happen, not while he still stood. The next day, William demanded an audience with his father. No schedule, no diplomacy, just a son demanding answers from a king. The conversation was far from civil. Charles, caught between loyalty to his wife and duty to the institution, appeared unprepared for the storm his son unleashed. William accused him directly of negligence, of allowing his heir to be sacrificed for a public image war. Camilla's influence, William claimed, had overstepped every boundary. What began as a confrontation escalated into an ultimatum. William threatened to relocate permanently. He spoke of pulling back from royal life, removing his children from palace programming, and moving the family to Windsor for their own protection. It was the first time anyone had seen William not as a prince, but as a father on the brink of revolt. The staff was left reeling. Behind closed doors, phones buzzed, and private calls were placed to trusted allies. William wasn't finished. If the institution wanted war, he would fight for his son with everything he had. He contacted key figures, those loyal to his late mother, those who had watched him grow into the role Camilla now sought to obscure. And the more he shared, the more allies began to whisper, quietly, that maybe the future needed protecting from within. But one person had already anticipated William's rebellion, and her next move would drive the royal family to the edge of implosion. While the family scrambled behind closed doors, Camilla played the long game. Silent, smiling, and calculating, she launched a shadow campaign across the Commonwealth. Every ally secured, every threat neutralized. And as Prince George's role diminished, her own bloodline quietly moved into the light. Camilla knew that raw confrontation wouldn't win her, the crown's legacy subtlety would. While Anne and William fought battles within palace walls, she expanded her reach beyond them. Her office began coordinating discreet meetings with key figures across the Commonwealth: governors, envoys, even foreign royals from nations that still held symbolic ties to the monarchy. These weren't formal affairs, they were curated conversations designed to plant seeds of modernization, of evolving public appeal, of the need to adapt. With charm and strategy, Camilla positioned her visio, N as inevitable, and her allies as progressive thinkers unbound by outdated succession laws. But her moves didn't stop with political overtures. Charities once historically linked to heirs apparent were suddenly handed over to her grandchildren. Royal patronages traditionally reserved for direct successors were transferred quietly under the guise of public revitalization. The optics were carefully controlled. Camilla's grandchildren stepping into spotlight roles with philanthropic gestures, television appearances, and exclusive interviews that subtly echoed the narrative of a new generation. The public, distracted by royal headlines and political noise, absorbed it without question. Meanwhile, a damning memo surfaced within palace walls, one that listed alternate succession contingencies in the event of a public shift in favor. Though unofficial, the very presence of such language sent shivers through the loyalists. Camilla wasn't simply exploring possibilities, she was preparing for them. Inside the palace, Charles grew increasingly dependent on her counsel. His public speeches began to reflect her influence, gentler in tone, more vague in language, subtly endorsing inclusivity over lineage. Where once he echoed legacy, now he spoke of flexibility. Camilla's phrasing began creeping into official statements, her worldview echoed by royal communications. Staff who questioned these changes found themselves reassigned or dismissed. Long-standing members of George's inner circle were replaced by fresh faces with quiet ties to Camilla's sphere. The resistance was being gutted from within, one strategic dismissal at a time. Beneath the surface, her plan was nearly complete. A rebranded monarchy, polished with diplomacy, dressed in progress, but held firmly in the grip of one woman's ambition. Her vision of a modern monarchy was never spoken outright, but those close to her knew the language. Public sentiment mattered more than blood. Relevance trumped birthright. And in that equation, George, the traditional heir, became a symbol of yesterday. But even as Camilla's influence grew, a surprise twist emerged, one that threatened to unravel her empire from within. She had remained quiet, graceful, poised, observant. But Catherine, Princess of Wales, had seen enough. What she did next sent a cold shiver through Camilla's camp. A private archive, a personal recording, and a single whispered phrase, "Not my son." While William's rage had been vocal, Catherine's approach was far more deliberate. She watched, listened, and began to gather her own evidence. She noticed the pattern early, the way George's royal milestones were being either delayed or quietly removed from schedules, the sudden change in tone from press coverage, and the unusual absence of long-time aides who once supported her son's progression. And rather than lash out, she documented. Each cancelled appearance, each reshuffled detail, every deviation was logged, privately and meticulously. But the turning point came when one of Camilla's advisors, perhaps unaware of a live recording device placed inside a private corridor, was captured mocking George's relevance. The recording, just under 2 minutes long, was enough to pierce through every veil of civility the palace tried to maintain. A voice identifiable stated with disdain that the future doesn't belong to heirs anymore. It belongs to favourites. George was called decorative and expendable, and that was the final line for Catherine. Without fanfare, Catherine began to make her move. She met quietly with senior members of royal households, those who had once stood alongside Queen Elizabeth, those who held deep reverence for the true line of succession. The recording was played in strict confidence, and the reaction was immense. What had been a quiet concern turned into urgent outrage. In hushed tones, support began to shift. The institution, long wary of scandal, found itself aligning not with the Queen Consort, but with the Princess of Wales. Even members of the press, traditionally restrained by royal boundaries, began receiving anonymous briefings. Suddenly, articles once drenched in ambiguity began to carry undertones of defiance. Headlines shifted. Focus returned to George. His presence was no longer a footnote, it was a statement. Catherine knew the power of image, and she wielded it with grace. She orchestrated an unannounced public engagement with George, standing firmly by his side. No leaks, no warnings. The cameras captured exactly what they needed to a confident future king, and a mother who would not let him be erased. The public response was thunderous. Photos flooded social media. The true heir trended globally. Inside Camilla's camp, panic set in. Advisors scrambled to rewrite narratives, but the damage had already taken hold. The narrative had slipped from their hands and landed in Catherine's. Camilla had underestimated her. She mistook Catherine's silence for passivity, her poise for submission. But now, the Queen Consort's shadow campaign had been pierced by light. And that light carried the face of a mother protecting her child, not through fury, but through strategy. But Catherine's bold defiance was only the beginning. The royal institution itself was about to speak, and what it had to say would change everything. Faced with rising tension, public whispers, and his children on the brink of revolt, King Charles was forced to choose. In a rare closed-door summit, every faction was present, but only one walked away with the crown's implicit support. The decision tore at the heart of the monarchy. The palace had reached its boiling point. Too many threads had been pulled. Too many secrets had spilled into the corridors. And now the royal foundation was trembling under the weight of its own silence. King Charles, cornered by pressure from both inside and out, called for an emergency summit, a private gathering meant to settle the storm before it turned into a constitutional crisis. It was not an invitation, it was a summons. Anne arrived first, holding a thick portfolio of evidence she had accumulated in secret. William followed, stone-faced and unflinching. Catherine, silent but steady, entered with the quiet power of someone who had already shifted public perception. And Camilla, fashionably late, glided in with the calm of someone who had never doubted her position. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any the monarchy had seen in decades. The air turned heavy as Anne laid bare the documents' timelines, signatures, reassignments, and that now infamo US memo outlining succession redirection. Her voice, usually measured, cracked only once, but it was enough to shake the room. Then William stood and made his position clear. Either George's rightful place was secured and reaffirmed publicly, or he would withdraw his family from the royal fold entirely. The threat wasn't theatrical. It was a father's promise. He would not raise his children in an institution that allowed backroom coups and veiled sabotage. The silence that followed was suffocating. All eyes turned to Camilla, and she didn't flinch. With cool defiance, she defended her actions as adaptive strategy. She dismissed the recordings as taken out of context and labelled the shifts in George's role as necessary evolution. She did not apologize. She did not yield. King Charles, visibly torn, sat with hands folded, the weight of his crown pressing harder than ever. On one side, the woman he loved. On the other, the son who would succeed him, and the sister who had been his shield through every storm. Time seemed to stand still before he finally spoke. The crown, he declared, must stand on the foundation of continuity. He announced a formal public reaffirmation of George's position as future monarch, reinstating all official grooming and appearances. Though his words were diplomatic, the message was not. The institution would not bend to internal sabotage, no matter how well disguised. Camilla's role, though untouched on the surface, was quietly scaled back. Her influence in key appointments was restricted, and several of her trusted advisors were reassigned to less critical roles. The decision sent ripples through the palace. It was not a victory parade, but it was a reckoning, one that reset the balance of power without an outright war. George's name returned to official communications. Catherine resumed her place as the guiding matriarch for the future king. A.N.D. William, for now, remained. But in the wake of the summit's fallout, Anne's raw emotion, her breaking voice, her whispered plea, revealed a truth the monarchy never anticipated. They say Princess Anne never cries, but that day, as she watched Prince George play unaware in the palace gardens, his destiny nearly stolen. Her tears fell silently, not for herself, but for the crown, for the past, and for the innocence that had almost been manipulated beyond recognition. The staff didn't mean to witness it. Anne, always composed, always impenetrable, stood at the window with her hand pressed against the glass. Outside, George laughed as he ran across the green, blissfully unaware of the storm he had unknowingly survived. Inside, Anne was still, except for the tears she could no longer suppress. A footman, pausing briefly before entering, caught the moment. He turned away quickly, out of respect. But the sight of Anne unmasked in her sorrow would stay with him forever. It wasn't grief for herself, it was grief for what almost was. A betrayal that came from within the family she had defended her entire life. Her decades of unwavering service suddenly felt heavier. The speeches, the ceremonies, the sacrifices. What did it all mean if the institution could be twisted so easily from inside? She had seen scandals come and go, witnessed the monarchy shift through eras of turbulence, but never had she feared for its soul. Until now. Camilla's campaign had not just targeted George, it had fractured trust, broken sacred lines, and nearly rewritten the monarchy without consent. That knowledge sat in Anne's chest like a stone. And yet, she had endured. She had fought. She had won. But it came at a price. Later that evening, Anne and Catherine sat in quiet conversation. No palace aides, no titles, just two women who had weathered the same storm. Anne confided that what pained her most was not Camilla's attempt, but how close it came to working. Catherine, her eyes steady, simply replied, "He'll never know how close it was. Because of you." It was then they agreed George needed to be told. Not the full weight of it, not yet, but enough. Enough for him to understand why everything had changed around him and why his path now needed even more courage than before. When they spoke to him, it was Catherine who began, but Anne who finished. She knelt beside him, took his hand and told him gently that some people had tried to change what was already his. But he had many guardians, seen and unseen, who would never let that happen. From that moment, Anne's role changed again. No longer just the Princess Royal, she became George's quiet sentinel. A guide, a shield, a living reminder that loyalty isn't declared, it's demonstrated. Her presence at his future engagements, once occasional, became consistent. No announcement was made, no titles changed. But within the walls of the palace, everyone understood, Anne would never allow such betrayal to fester again. As the dust settles, one question lingers in the minds of many. If a prince's destiny can be rewritten in silence, what else might be unfolding behind the palace gates? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.